tradition. But that's the standard by which we define what a good tradition is meant to. It's the English.
You're getting to the standard too fast. Wait. You're getting to the standard too fast. First, I want to know factually, is it true that all societies work like this? Because if it's true that all societies work like this, then saying we should be free from it is just a fantasy.
No, I don't think all societies. I think much of what happened in America post-founding in the 19th century didn't look like that. I think that's the genius of America. And I think what happened during the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution, what happened in the 19th century, to some extent globally, but certainly in the United States, didn't work that way. It broke tradition. I think all innovation breaks tradition, and I think that's what the key of this country is in the post-enlightenment world is. I think pre that tradition, they look that way. And then the question is, do people understand why these people do it? That is, I don't want people doing what I think is right just because I think it's right, and I've created a society in which, okay, somebody founded this country in a particular way, so just going to follow. I want people to understand what they're doing. So I want people to have a respect for property, not because it's a tradition, but because they understand the value of a respect for property. I want people not to murder one another, not because they command that shall not murder, but because they have an understanding of why murdering is bad, wrong, and bad for them and bad for the kind of world that they want to live. And I think that's what we achieve through enlightenment, through education, through and where we don't treat people just as a law, tribe that just follows orders. But we now treat individuals as capable of thinking for themselves, capable of discovering truth, capable of figuring out their own values, and that's the big break between. And this is why this is the break I think that the Declaration represents. The break between society and because they are the rules, because they are the commandments, and a society where individuals understand those, yes, it's now become a tradition, let's say, to respect individual rights, to respect property. But they're not following it because it's a tradition. They're following it because they understand what it is about that makes it good. So that's the world I think that we were on the process of evolving towards. And that is what got destroyed in the 20th century and certainly disappeared today. And I think that's a great tragedy, is that we were evolving to a place where people understood the values that represent. Of course, the danger with tradition is, we'll agree, right? It's okay to kill the Jew, right? Or it's okay to steal property if they're a certain color, or a slave. Those are all traditions. And yet, once you stop and say, but what are they based on? Is this right? Is this just? Based on some moral law? No, it's not. There's something wrong here. You can't achieve happiness and success if you follow these.
You're talking about reason and tradition, but I think I would love to sort of linger on the stickiness of humans. So you kind of said this primary for individuals is primary, that was a great invention, but to me it's not at all obvious that somehow that the invention that humans have been practicing for a very long time of the stickiness of community, of family, of love. That's not obvious to me. That's not also fundamental to human flourishing. It should be celebrated and protected. Of course, now I suppose the argument you're making is when you start to let the state define what the stickiness, how the stickiness looks between humans. You're really like the voluntary aspect. But I just want to sort of the observation is humans seem to pretty happy form communities, however you define that. So romantic partnership, family.
Some communities. People are miserable in other communities. So the nature of the community matters, right? We know this. We know that some bondings are not healthy and not good for people, and they don't thrive. So I absolutely. I'm a lover, not a fighter, right? So I'm a huge believer in love. No philosophy, I think, is a love-based philosophy. I fight in order to love, right? So it's love is at the core of all of this. It's a love of life. It's a love of the world out there, and it's a love of other people because they represent a value to you. So the stickiness is there. It's my point is A, it should be chosen. It should be consciously chosen. And this is, I'm going to put aside the state. Forget the state for a minute. Forget codes. Forget all that. What I would encourage individuals to do, and this is where, I'm not primarily a political folk, interested in politics or religion. I tend to talk most about that. I'm primarily interested in human beings and how they live, in a sense, in morality. And what I would urge individuals to do is to think about their relationship. Choose the best relationships possible, but just seek out great relationships because other human beings are an immense value to you. And when I write, maybe you don't quote this or not, but I write that about the trade principle of trade. It's easy and obvious to think of it as a materialistic kind of thing. I do the chores this day, and my wife does the chores the other day. We're trading, but trading is much more subtle than that. Can be much more spiritual. It's about the trading in emotions. It's about the way one sees each other, what one gets from one another. I think friendship is a form of trade. Now I know that seems to make it material, but I don't think it's a trade as a material thing. But friendship is incredibly important in life. Love is incredibly important in life. Having a group of friends is incredibly important. All of these are sticky and important.
Okay, how can I try to be eloquent on this? So, if you give people freedom, if you give people, not politics, uh, relationships. So this is interesting. We have an interesting dynamic going on here in terms of beliefs. They're differing, and there's interesting overlaps. But there is a worry. If you look at human history and you study lessons of history, you look at modern society. If you give people freedom in terms of stickiness and human relations and so on, if you not give people freedom, emphasize freedom as the highest ideal, you start getting more tender online dating. The stickiness dissolves, just like in chemistry. You start to have a gas versus a liquid, right? That's the word. You have to study what actually happens. You emphasize that the stickiness, the bonds of humans is holding you back. The exercise of voluntary choice is the highest ideal. The danger of that is for that to be implemented or interpreted in certain kinds of ways by us flawed humans that are not. I mean, you can say we're perfectly reasonable and rational and think through all of our decisions, but really, especially when you're young, you get horny and make decisions that are suboptimal, perhaps. So the point is, you have to look at reality of when you emphasize different things. So when you talk about what is the ideal life, what is the ideal relations, you have to also think like, what are you emphasizing? I think you both agree on what's important, that community can be important, that freedom is important. What are you emphasizing? So you really emphasize the individual, and you're emphasizing, you're emphasizing more of the community, of the family, of the stickiness of the nation.
I don't want to deny the place of the individual. I think that there really is a very great change in civilization when the books of Moses announced that the individual is created in the image of God. That's a step that's, as far as we know, without precedent before that in history. And to a very large degree, I mean, one of the kind of unspoken things going on is that Yaron and I really do agree on all sorts of things. I think in part because we're both Jewish. And so,
You just say Yaron's basically Moses.
no, I think it's channeling Moses. But that's still, in my book, that's still a pretty compliment. That's pretty good. For me, that's a compliment.
And we'll talk about this a little bit just for the listener, just so they know, amongst many things we'll talk about the Russian nationalism, but you're also a religious scholar, so to at least leverage the Bible for not much which puts some of the wisdom to play.
Look, the way that Yaron looks at enlightenment, or maybe Ayn Rand, that's the way that I see the Hebrew scripture and the tradition that comes from it. It has the same kind of place in my life. I don't know how much we want to explore it, but I think that that the agreement that we do have about the positive value of the creative individual, the positive value of the individual's desire to improve the world, and in my book that means including his or her desire to improve his family, his tribe, his congregation, his nation. But it still comes from this kind of what Yaron calls selfishness, the desire to make things better for yourself. In Hebrew Bible, in Judaism, that just is a positive thing. Of course, it can be taken too far, but it just is positive, and it doesn't carry these kinds of you should turn the other cheek, you should give away your cloak, you should love your enemies. These kinds of Christian tropes do not exist in Judaism, and so it just. I like listening to Yaron's. I do feel like he goes too far on various things, but I also hear underneath it, I can sort of here's the Jewish current and the resistance to things that about Christianity the Jews often find.
Can I ask you a question there? Can you make an argument for turn the other cheek? I tend to, I guess you would equate that with altruism. I tend to,
It's unjust.
Well,
okay, so,
It's a lack of love, lack of self-respect.
well, let me push back on that, because I like turn the other cheek, especially on Twitter. So,
I like block the offender on Twitter.
no, what, so Twitter aside, is more like you're investing in the long term version of yourself versus the short term. So that's the way I think about it. Is like the energy you put out to the world. Turning the other cheek philosophy to walk through the fire gracefully. In some sense, I mean, perhaps you refrain that it's not then that's not being altruistic or whatever. But there is something pragmatic about that kind of approach to life.
Disciplining yourself so that you become a better version of yourself. I mean, not only do we agree, but I think every religious philosophical tradition probably has a version of that. Even Kant, we join together in finding it terrible. Even Kant makes that distinction between the short-term interest and the long-term interest. So I think that's universal. I don't know of anybody who's really disagreeing about that. The thing that we were talking about a couple of minutes ago, before we got onto this tangent, is the relationship between the individual who is in the image of God and is of value as an individual. Nevertheless, there's this question about what is good for that person, and also what makes them happy. I'm not sure that those are exactly the same things, but they're both certainly relevant and important. And I feel like, and I think we're beginning to uncover this empirical disagreement about what it is that's good for the individual and what it is that makes them happy. And I'll go back to something I raised in the debate, which is this theory of Durkheim that now has been popularized by Jordan Peterson. Durkheim argues that he's writing a book on suicide, trying to understand what brings individuals to suicide. And he coins this term, anomie, lack of law. And the argument is that individuals basically are healthy and happy when they find their place in a hierarchy. In a loyalty group, in a certain place in a hierarchy, they compete and struggle in order to rise in the hierarchy, but they know where they are. They know who they are. The kids today like to say they know what their identity is because they associate themselves. Their self expands to take on the leadership, the different layers, the past and the future of this particular hierarchy. Now, I completely completely agree with Yaron that some of these hierarchies are pernicious and oppressive and terrible, and some of them are better. What we might disagree about is that you can find human beings who are capable of becoming healthy and happy off by themselves without participating in this kind of structure. The minute that you accept, if you accept, that this is empirical reality, but you need it's an iron law. You can't do anything. You can tell human beings that they can be free of all constraints all you want. And you can get them to do things that as you say, dissolve their that they got to contest for hierarchies. They could say, I'm not gonna serve the man. I'm going to, I'm just gonna burn them all down. You can get them to say get kids to say all these things. You can get them either to be Marxists or actively trying to overthrow and destroy the existing hierarchies, or you can make them some kind of liberal where they basically pretend the hierarchies don't exist. They just act like this. They're not there. In both cases, it's not coincidence because that's what universities teach us. Marxist revolution, liberal, ignoring the hierarchies. In both cases, what you've done is eliminated the possibility that the young person will be able to find his or her place in a way that allows them to grow and exercise their love, their drive, their creativity in order to advance something constructive, eliminate it, and put the burden on them, kind of an chance to just be the fountain of all values yourself, which, maybe some people can do it, but almost no one can do it. I think that's important. And so I think by telling them about their freedom rather than telling them about about the need to join into some traditionalist hierarchy that could be good and healthy for them, I think we're destroying them. I think we're destroying this generation and the last one and the next.
Yaron, is the burden of freedom destroying men?
What freedom? I mean, how many people are indeed free? Look, the problem is that we're caught up on political concepts, and we're moving into ethical issues, and I don't think it's right to tell people you're free, go do whatever the hell you want. Just use your emotions. Just go where you want to go. Explore them all. Think short term. Don't think long term. But don't think. Wait then. One has to provide moral guidance, and morality here is crucially important. And part of taking responsibility for your own life is establishing a moral framework for your life, and what does it mean to live a good life? That's much more important of a question, and it is my belief that people can do that. They can find and choose the values necessary to achieve a good life, but they need guidance. They need guidance. This is what religion evolved because people need guidance. So I call religion a primitive philosophy. It was the original philosophy that provided people with some guidance about what to do and what not to do. And secular philosophy is supposed to do the same. And the problem is that I think religion and 99% of secular philosophy give people bad advice about what to do, and therefore they do bad stuff. And some of that sometimes, because when they do good stuff, it gets reinforced. We survive in spite of that. But ideas like Kant and Hegel and Marx and so on give young people awful advice about how to live and what to do. And really bad stuff happens. And the world in which we live today, we agree there's a lot of apologies to it. There's a lot of bad stuff going on. In my view, is going wrong. In my view, a product of a set of ideas. On the one hand, I think Christian ideas. On the other hand, I think secular philosophical ideas that have driven this country and the world in a really bad direction. And this is why what I do because I think at the core of it, the only way to change it is not to impose a new set of ideas from the top, because I value my views in position. Plus, I don't believe you can force people to do it. It's to challenge the ideas. It's to question the ideas. It's to present an alternative view of morality, an alternative set of moral principles, an alternative, ultimately, an alternative view of political principles. But it has to start with morality. If you don't, and my morality is centered on the individual, what the individual should do with his life to attain a good life. I believe that leads to happiness, but the good life, that's why it's good, right? The goal is survival and thriving and flourishing and happiness ultimately. But politics is a servant of that, and it's not an end in itself. So the real issue is, you asked before, what is the value relationship? It's an almost value in relationship because we get values from other people. We don't produce all our values. We don't produce all our spiritual values. And we don't produce all our material values. Other people are a massive benefit to us because they produce values. There's a massive division of labor in terms of values, not just in economics, but also in philosophy and elsewhere. It's why we have teachers. It's why we have moral teachers. Moral teachers are important to help guide us towards a good life. Not all of us are philosophers. But what I do demand, if you will, of individuals, this is where I put a quote, right? Understand what's right. Don't embrace a moral teaching because it was tradition. Don't embrace a moral teaching because your parents embraced it. Don't embrace a moral teaching just because your teachers are teaching it. Challenge it. Think about it. Embrace it because you embrace it. You might be wrong. You might embrace the wrong one, but take moral responsibility. Take responsibility over your life by evaluating, testing, challenging what you have received and choosing what you're going to pursue. And I acknowledge that most people don't do that, and this is why intellectual leadership is so important. This is why you want to get people. You want the voices in a culture to be good voices, so that those people who don't think for themselves end up being followers, but they end up being followers of something good versus followers of something bad. But for the thinkers in the world, who I think are the people who count, the people who shape society. No, shape society. But anyway, that counts in a sense that you can dismiss the lives of others, because of, obviously I'm anti-corruption and anti-violence.
Sound like Plato.
But yes, I don't want to sound like Plato, but in a sense that they're the ones who end up shaping the world. They're the ones who end up shaping how the world is. I want those people to make choices about their value and not to just accept them based on tradition or based on commandment or based on where they happen to grow up. And in that sense, again, I do, and this is an interesting point where we disagree, but I'm not exactly sure what you want to say. I do believe in universal values. That is, there are things that are good, and there are things that are evil, and I think we agree on that. And there are systems, we agree that communism and fascism are evil. Well, I think we should be able to agree that some things are yes, some are good. Yeah. And maybe there's this middle ground where we both think that they're not particularly bad, but not particularly good, and you all might think they're better than I think they are. But if we can agree on this is good and this is evil, right? Then the systems that tend towards the good are good, and the systems that tend towards evil are evil. But that's universal, right? I look at places like South Korea, Japan, Asian, cultures that are very, very different in many respects of the West, and yet when they adopt certain Western ideas, right, about freedom, about individualism in the Japanese Constitution, because of course, it has the pursuit of happiness in the Constitution, not because they've chosen it, but in it. But they, to some extent, adopted that, and they're successful. They're successful places today. Those societies in Asia that didn't adopt these values are not successful societies.
Japan has a birth rate of, what is it, 1.1, 1.2 children per woman. I mean, look, there are some things, there's some places where you give people freedom. This is also biblical, right? The idea that everyone did what's right in his own eyes. Anyway, this is a refrain of the book of Judges. And the Bible is not an anti-freedom book. There's many. I don't believe we're good. No, we're not. Fine. So
we'll get there.
Okay. He's the guy. Okay, look. Just as an ask, I'm not asking you because the Bible is such a great authoritarian book. It's not that at all. In my view, if you want to know where what you call the sanctity of property. Where does the sanctity of property comes from? It comes from the Ten Commandments, is saying, I haven't taken anything from anyone. Samuel saying, I haven't taken anything from anyone. It's the condemnation of of the unjust things, steal property of their subject. So I'm not. So I'm property and freedom. I think there's great basis for it in the Bible. But right now, I'm focusing on this other question, which is what happens when everyone does what's right in his own eyes. That's the book of Judges, and that's this civil war, world corruption, theft, idolatry, murder, rape. And that's what happens when everyone does whatever is right in his own eyes. But that's what it says in the text. Okay, so when I look at, you're right, there are things that I think are objectively true. I think it's really hard to get people to agree to them. Almost impossible. But when I look at a country which is approaching one birth per woman, in other words, half of the minimum necessary for replacement, you can say whatever you want about immigration, you can have the discussion. But the point is that when your values are such that you're not even capable of doing the most basic techniques that human beings need in order to be able to propagate themselves and their values and the way they see things, then I look, you can't say that.
So if I imply that Japan is an ideal society, I take that back. But
no, I just think about Japan. I just think we're in trouble. We're in trouble.
Give me a second. Hold you back. I'm sorry.
It's his show, man. We enter into his hierarchy. That's it.
We should talk about higher.
But no, just to clarify, how do you explain the situation in Japan? Is it the decrease in value of family, like some of the? Just expand on that. Like, how do you explain that situation? You're saying that society is in trouble, in a sense, like you kind of describe the nature of that trouble.
I'm saying that when the individual is part of a social group, it's going to be a family, a congregation, a community, a tribe, a nation. When the individual feels that the things that are happening to the society are things that are happening to him or to her. And I want to emphasize, this is not the standard view of collectivism that, that Mussolini will say, the glory of the individual is in totally immersing himself in the organic whole. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that human beings have and are both. They enter into a society to which they are loyal, and they compete with one another with in the terms that that society allows competition, but also sometimes by bending the rules and by shaking them and by changing them. What you see in many societies, certainly throughout the liberal West, but also in countries that have been affected by the liberal West, by industrialization and ideas of individualism, what you see is a collapse of a willingness of the individual to look at what is needed by the whole, and to make choices that are as you only call them selfish because the purpose of them is self-expression, competition, self-assertion, moving up in the hierarchy, achieving honor or wealth in order to do those things. But when you stop being able to look at the framework of a particular society and identify with it, you cease to understand what it is that we need to do. That not every single person, but I'm talking about society-wide. So there are a few individuals who are just going to have a fantastic time and live the kind of life that you're always describing, and the great majority, they stop being willing to take risks. They stop being willing to get married. They stop being willing to have children. They stop being willing to start companies. They stop being willing to put themselves out to do great things because the guide rails that told them what kinds of things and the social feedback that honored them when they did things like getting married and having children, they've been crushed. And what have they been crushed by? They've been crushed by the false view that if you tell the people be free, make all your own decisions, that they will then be free and make all their own decisions. They don't. They just stop. they stop being human.
That's powerful. So, you want to respond to that?
Yes. So I don't think anybody should have children. If the goal, there's a good tweet clip that you can make. I don't think anybody should have children for the goal of perpetuating their nation or expanding their society, or for some, I think they'd make horrible parents if that was the goal, the purpose of doing it. I think people should have children because they want to embrace that challenge, that beauty, that experience, that amazing, very, very hard, very, very difficult experience in life. It's about being able to project the long term, but also being able to enjoy and love the creation of another human being. That process of creation, it is a beautiful, self-existent thing. And by the way, not everybody should have children. I think way too many people have children. There's some awful parents out there that I wish would stop. I mean, life is precious, and life of suffering is sad. It's sad to see people suffering. A lot of people are born into situations, born into parents that destroy the capacity to ever live a good life, and that's a tragic and sad thing. And so I don't measure the health of a society in how many children they have in life, or health of a couple, or whether they have children or not. Those are individual choices. Some people make a choice not to have children, which is completely rational and consistent with their values. Now, when you look at a society overall, I do think having children or not having children is a reflection of something. I think it's a reflection of a certain optimism about the future. I think it's a reflection of thinking long term versus short term. I think a short term society doesn't have children. People don't have children there because children are a long term investment. They require real planning and real effort and real thinking about the long term. But those are moral issues. And again, we're confusing, we're mixing. When I say Japan, look how well Japan is doing. I don't mean the specific Japanese people and how many kids they're having and what kind of life they're having, in terms of these kind of particulars. But think about the alternatives Japan faces. Look around, the options, right, that they face. They tried empire. They tried nationalistic empire. It didn't turn out too well for them or anybody who they interact with. They could have become North Korea. We know how that turned out. They could have been Cambodia, if you've ever been to Cambodia and seen the kind of poverty. And yes, maybe Cambodians have lots of children. But God, I'd rather be in Japan any day than have children in the kind of poverty, horrific circumstances they have. But in the context of the available regimes that were possible post-World War II for the Japanese to embrace, they embraced one that generally led to prosperity, to freedom, to individuals pursuing values. Not perfectly, because they didn't implement the philosophical foundation, the moral foundation that I would like to have. They're still being impacted by Kantian, Hegelian, whatever philosophy that's out there in the West that's destroying the better parts of freedom. Now, what do they do with it? And if they have a bad philosophy, they're going to do bad things with that thing, right? You tell people to do whatever they choose to do, but if they have bad ideas, they will choose to do bad things. So it is true that the primacy of morality and the primacy of philosophy has to be recognized. It's not the primacy of politics. And indeed, you don't get free society unless you have some elements of decent philosophy. But you can get free societies with a rotten philosophy, but they don't stay free for very long.
I don't understand how can it be a decent philosophy if it doesn't care about posterity. If it does, if you want to say, I'm offering guidance. I think you should live as a trader. All relationships should be voluntary. Those are interesting things, but the moment that it comes to posterity, to the future, to there being a future, let's say that there were a society that lived the way, in general, according to your view, let's say there was such a society. How can you not care whether that society is capable of passing it on to the next generation or not?
But the way to pass it on to the next generation is through ideas and not through having children. Having children is individual ways. That some people are going to make and some people are not. But they're fundamental that preserve the good life.
What does that even mean?
There's a sense
If every generation from now on, your society was good at a certain point, has half as many people in it, it's going to very quickly. It's just going to be overrun. Overrun by who? So what do you mean overrun by who? Are we just totally ahistorical? If you're the Spartans and you have all of these, like warrior values, but you stop having children, you get overrun. You get defeated.
This is what it's a good thing, not a bad thing. But
My point, you have to have the ability to have enough children to create enough wealth and enough power, enough strength.
who makes these kind of conclusive decisions about how many you make it as an individual? If you decide that
We're talking about what kind of intellectual, cultural, religious inheritance you give your children.
so, right? And those are the ideas that you and those ideas are going to perpetuate because they're good ideas. If they're bad ideas,
you're not going to perpetuate. They can't be good ideas if we don't produce future generations. What are you talking about?
I mean, as I
Look
said,
at every liberal society on earth is in democratic collapse.
there's not a single liberal society on earth that I'm willing to defend. Because they're not living by
So
they're not accepting.
so
they have a semblance. I have a semblance of a political system that is a little bit like what I would like. Off of what I
know.
But they certainly don't have a moral foundation. I believe that people have the right moral foundation. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them will have children. Most of them will continue into the future. Most of them will fight for the future. But not because they care what happens in 200 years, but because they care about their lifetime. And part of having fun and enjoying one's lifetime is having kids, is projecting into the future.
You're going to tell me that people have children because it's fun? They're fun when they're 4 years old. They're not fun when they're 15.
No, when they're 15, they're not.
They're just not fun. Look, you don't
I'm learning so much today.
You don't do this for fun. You don't. Marriage also you don't do for fun. There are times that are fun and there are times that are not fun.
Fun is not exactly what like you certainly do it for happiness, you do it for fulfillment, you do it as a challenge, you do it for making your life better, for making your life interesting, for making your life challenging, for embracing. Part of it is fun, part of it is hard work, but you do it because it makes your life a better life.
It's very interesting. So, empirically speaking, if you dissolve the cultural backbone where everybody comes up, like background, the moral ideas that everybody's raised, if you dissolve that, if you truly emphasize the individual, I think you're almost saying it's going to naturally lead to the dissolution of marriage and all these concepts. So you're not, so like everything, well, basically saying you're not going to choose some of these things. You're going to more and more choose the short-term optimization versus the long-term optimization beyond your own life, like posterity.
So I don't think about posterity. I don't know what posterity means, right? I can project into my children's life. Maybe when I have grandchildren's life, but it ends there. I can't project 300 years into the future. It's ridiculous to try to think about 300 years into the future. Things change so much. In a place, they don't have fathers. That's the conservative founding father. Well, no, I don't think. I think they set up a system. I think the whole idea was to set up a system that was self-perpetuating. That would, if people lived up to it, right? No, would perpetuate the
No systems are self-perpetuating. Things rise and fall, and
they don't have systems rise and fall. I don't believe in that.
Let me speak to your art for a second. The great individuals in societies are the people who have seen the decline, understood it, and provided resources in order to redirect and bring it back up. You can't agree to that?
I don't see it that way at all. Yes, I want people out there to rebel against conventional morality. I think conventional morality is destructive to their own lives and broadly to posterity because I think it's unsustainable. It's not good. It goes to, I think conventional morality is Christian morality. It's a morality that's secularized through Christian lens, and I think it's destructive. But I don't want them to dump that and not replace it with something. I want, and I think it's necessary and essential for people to have a moral code and to have a moral code. Morality is a set of guidelines to live your life. It's a set of values to guide you, to help you identify what is good and what is bad.
Hold on a second. You're saying central to this morality, you're not saying other things. You're basically saying reason will arrive at a lot of things. Why are you so sure that reason is so important?
Nothing else.
No, plus it seems like obvious to you. So first of all, humans have limited cognitive capacity, so even to assume the reason to actually function that well from an artificial intelligence researcher perspective, it seems
the whole discussion about whether there is such a thing as artificial intelligence, whether that is what it is.
But see, here's the thing: you're very confident about this particular thing, but not about other aspects of human nature that seems to be obviously present. So yes, almost human relations, love, connection between us. So it's very possible to argue that all of the accomplishments of reason would not exist without the connection of other humans.
Of course, that's true.
It's not obvious though. It's possible that reason is a property of the collective, of multiple people interacting with each other. When you look at the greatest inventions of human history, some people tell that story by individual inventors. You could argue that's true. Some people say that it's a bunch of people in the room together. The idea is bubbling. And if you're saying individual is primary and they have the full power and capacity to make choices, I don't know if that's necessarily obvious.
So there's a small man going on here. Of course,
My favorite thing.
You don't do it, and you do it more politely than anybody else I know when you do it. Of course, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. Of course, invention and science is collaborative. Not always, not 100%. Newton stood on the shoulders of giants. I don't know how collaborative he was. He wasn't exactly as a building up and testing ideas out with other people. But this is a metaphysical fact. You can't eat from it. There's no collective stomach. You can't eat from it. You can provide me with food, but I need to do the eating. You can't think for me. You can help stimulate my thought. You can challenge my thinking. You can add to it. But in the end of the day, only I can either do my thinking or not do my thinking. But I need to think.
Like you can think all by yourself alone.
What does that mean, all by yourself, right? Can I think on a desert island? Yes, I can think on a desert island. Can I think as big and as broad and as deep as I can in Aristotle's Lyceum? Of course not. I'm a much better thinker in Aristotle's Lyceum, or in any kind of situation like this where you're going to challenge me and I have to come back and I have to think deeply about what it is you said and why I'm not communicating very effectively and why you're not understanding me. Of course, now you're causing me to think much more deeply and to challenge me. But it's still true that I have to think. And if I don't think for myself, who's going to think for me, right? So this is why I'm not a philosopher. I'm certainly not an original thinker in that sense. I recognize the fact that there are geniuses that are much smarter than me, Aristotle, Ayn Rand, or people that inspire me. I study their work. I try to understand it to the best of my ability, but I don't take it as gospel. I take it as, this is something I need to figure out. I need to learn it. I need to understand it because it's good for my life. It's important to me. But I have to do the thinking. It won't be mine. It'll be Ayn Rand's, but it won't be mine unless I've done the thinking to integrate it into my soul, into my consciousness, into my mind. But it's still true that I have to think for myself, not on a desert island. Right? And I now regret ever using a desert island in the book as an example because clearly it was misunderstood. I didn't make myself clear enough in the book in terms of what I meant. But I do not advocate for thinking alone in a dark room, not engaging with reality, not studying history, not knowing about the world, or on a desert island, not interacting with your thought. No, I'm a trader. So I enjoy what we're doing right now because you're challenging. You make me a better thinker. It's interesting, the fact that a lot of people are going to watch this plays into it as well. But I would probably enjoy engaging with you in conversation.
Recording. So
yeah, there you go. I would enjoy engaging with you in conversation, even if it wasn't being recorded, even if it was because that kind of conversation makes me better. There's some people who I wouldn't. There's some people who make it right that you want to walk away from the conversation because they're harmful to you. And this is where choice comes in. I want to be able to choose who I engage with. I don't always have that choice because as a pumpkin toaster, you go in front of audience, you don't always choose who it is, but you want to choose who you engage with and who you don't. You want to choose the forum in which you engage and how you engage, and the standard for me is reason. There is no other standard. So you ask a deep question to start off. Why reason? Because that's where the values come from. That's the only tool we have to discover truth. Yes, reason is something that it doesn't guarantee truth. It doesn't guarantee you're always right. It's fallible, but it's all we have. It's the tool in which we evaluate the world around us, and we come to conclusions about it. There just isn't other tool. Emotions are not tools of cognition.
Consciousness is a tool with emotion, with love. All of these things are ways to experience the world. To say that reason is the best tool.
But there's a difference between experiencing the world and evaluating the world in terms of what is truth or what is not.
As a scientist, I appreciate the value of reason.
And emotions and love are consequences. They're not primary. Emotions are consequences of conclusions you come to. Your emotions will change very quickly, relatively speaking, when your evaluations of a situation will change. Different people can see exactly the same scene in a completely different emotion because they're bringing different value systems and they're bringing different thoughts to the process.
Maybe love is primary, but let me ask.
Love is the same thing. You can fall out of love with somebody. Why? Because you've learned something new. Because you've discovered something new about the person. Now you don't love them.
The wrong podcast to bring up love. We'll talk forever about it. So, you wrote the book *Virtue of Nationalism*, contrasting nations with empires with the governors like nations and so on. So, you argue that nationalism uniquely provides the quote the collective right of a free people to rule themselves. Continuing our conversation, why is this particular collection of humans, we call it a nation, a uniquely powerful way to preserve the freedom of people to have people rule themselves?
Before I say anything on the subject, I should emphasize that I'm not a rationalist. I'm an empiricist. I'm offering what I think is a valid observation of human history. I don't have some kind of deductive framework for proving that that the nation is the best. And empirically, we know something about the way systems of national states work and about the way empires work and the way tribal societies work. What we don't know is, is it possible to invent something else? Or there's a lot of things we don't know. So, with the caveat that I'm making an empirical observation, the basic argument is human beings form collectives naturally, loyalty groups, and for most of human history and prehistory, as far as we know, human beings lived in tribal societies. Tribal societies are societies in which there's constant friction and constant warfare among very small groups, among families and clans. And we reach a turning point in human history with the invention of large-scale agriculture, which allows the creation of vast wealth. It allows the establishment of standing armies instead of militias. Sargon of Akkad says, I can pay 5,000 men to do nothing other than to drill in the arts of war, and then I'm going to send them out to conquer the neighboring city-states, and there you have empire. The Bible, which is the source of our image, our conception of a world of independent nations that are not constantly trying to conquer one another. The source of that is the Bible, and the biblical world is one in which Israel and various other small nations are trying to fight for their independence against world empires, against empires Babylonian, Assyrian, Persian, Egyptian, which aspire to rule the world. My claim is fundamentally twofold. It's moral, that whenever you conquer a foreign nation, you're murdering, you're stealing, you're destroying. As your own would say, you're using force to cause people to submit. So there is something in the prophets that rebels against this ongoing atrocity and carnage of trying to take over the whole world. And there's a prudential, practical argument, which is that the world is governed best when there are multiple nations, when they're free to experiment and chart their own courses. That means that they have their own route to God, they have their own moralities, they have their own forms of economy and government. And what tends to happen in history is that when something is successful, when something looks like what people, different nations look at, and say, well, those people they're flourishing, they're succeeding, then it's imitated. And in the way that the Dutch invented the stock market, and the English said, look, that makes them powerful, so we'll adopt it. So that there's endless examples of that. So that's the argument for it. The argument is since we don't know a priori, deductively from self-evident principles what is best, it's best to have a world in which people are trying different things.
So, quick question, because the word nationalism sometimes is presented in a negative light in connection to the nationalism of Nazi Germany, for example. So you're looking empirically at a world of nations that respect each other.
I use the word nationalism the way that I inherited it in my tradition,
Yes,
which is it's a principled standpoint that says that the world is governed best when many nations are able to be independent and chart their own course. That's nationalism. As far as the Nazis, Hitler's an imperialist. He hated nation states. His whole theory, if you pick up, I don't recommend doing this, but if you do,
Actually, reading it right now, Mein Kampf.
right, if you do read Mein Kampf, then you'll see that he says explicitly that the goal is for Germany to be the lord of the earth, the mistress of the globe, and he detests the idea of the independent nation state because he sees it as weak and effete. He might as well have said it's Jewish.
So let me ask from the individual perspective, for nationalism, what do you make of the value of the love of country? The reason I connect that, so I personally, what would you say, a patriot? I love the love of country, or I am susceptible, or I should, in a Randian way, I enjoy,
Love is good. Love is a good word.
Well, I love a lot of things, but I'm saying this particular love is a little bit contentious, which is loving your country. That's an interesting love that some people are a little uncomfortable with. Especially when that love, I grew up in the Soviet Union, to say, you just love the country. It represents a certain thing to you. And it's not, you don't think that philosophically, like I was marching around with like marks on my arm or something like that. It's just loving community at the level of nation. It's very interesting. I don't know if that's an artifact of the past that we're going to have to strip away. I don't know if I was just raised in that kind of community, but I appreciate that. But I guess the thing I'm torn about is that love of country that I have in my heart, that I now love America and I consider myself an American. That would have easily, if I was born earlier, been used by Stalin, and I would have probably died on the battlefield. I would have probably died if I was in Nazi Germany as a German, and I would probably die as an American. Yes. Well, I think about this a lot.
It's interesting to run a radical counterfactual, be sure of the answer.
I'm not sure. I mean, but I think about this a lot because obviously I'm really interested in history, and I hope this is the way I think about most situations I empathize. I really try to do hard work of placing myself in that moment and thinking through it. I just know myself psychologically. What I'm susceptible to, that's a negative way to phrase it, but what I would love doing. And so I'm just saying, my question is the love of nation a useful or a powerful moral, sort of from a moral philosophy perspective, a good thing?
I think it's a good thing, but before we ask whether it's a good thing, I think it's worth asking whether there's any way to live without it. It's the idea of national independence, of a world or a continent which politically is governed by multiple independent national states. That is a political theory. Somebody came up with that. In the Bible or elsewhere, someone came up with this idea and sold it, and a lot of people like it. But the nation is not an invention. Every place in human history that we have any record of, there are nations. And so that the fact of people creating families, families creating an alliance of clans, clans creating alliances of tribes, tribes creating alliances of an alliance that becomes the nation. We see that everywhere in human history, everywhere we look. And the love of a group of tribes that have come together in order to fight opponents that are trying to destroy your way of life and steal your land and harm your women and children. The love of the leadership that brings it together. This is, a George Washington type figure, or an Alfred the Great type figure, or Saul, the biblical Saul, somebody who has the wisdom, the daring to unite the tribes, overcome their internal mutual hatreds and grievances, and rally them around a set of ideas, a language, a tradition, an identity, as people say today. That love is eradicable from human beings. People have braved the world, people take drugs in order to get rid of it.
The problem is that can be leveraged by authoritarian.
Yes, but that's true of everything. It's like saying, you can have children and you can teach them to be evil. You can make a lot of money, you can use it for evil. You can have a gun for self-defense, but you can use it for evil. Come on, that's human. That's being human.
You guys are making love this primary, which I don't think it is. But there are lots of
How
people.
dare you?
I know there are lots of people in the world out there who don't love their nation because the nation is not worth loving. That is, love is conditional. It's not unconditional. Love is conditional on the value that's presented to you. Right? So I lived through this experience in my own life. Right? I grew up in Israel at a time of everything was geared towards patriotism in the state. I would say I was trained to when I saw a grenade to jump on it because that was every song and every story and everything was about the state is everything and you should sacrifice. And when the flag went up, I got teary-eyed. I bought into it completely. And at some point I rejected it. And I changed. And I changed my alliance. And I rejected my love of Israel. It's not that I don't love it anymore, but it's certainly not my top love. And I'm certainly not looking for the grenade to jump on it. And I'm volunteering to go fight with it. And I fell in love from a distance with the idea of America. I love the idea of America more than I love America. Right? And I can see myself falling in love, out of love with America, given where it's heading. Right? It's not automatic. It's conditioned on what it is that it represents and what it is, what value it represents. For me, and I think that's always the case with love. It's not true that children have to love their parents. That's the ideal, and hopefully most children love their parents because their parents. But some children fall out of love with their parents because their parents don't deserve their love. And the same with the other way around. I think parents are capable of not loving their children. Right? So it's love is a conditional thing. It's not automatic. But let me point out an agreement with. Let me say something when you agree with it.
Soften the blow, right? Mostly, I like to talk to Yaron about his ideas, and I don't want to talk about Ayn Rand, but I want to say something. Just one thing about Ayn Rand. All my kids read Ayn Rand's books. My father read The Fountainhead. I don't know, we know Ayn Rand, and I'll tell you, it is incredibly difficult reading. It's painful. It's painful to read. Why is it painful? Not because I disagree with the view of trading and business and the creativity of and Reardon Mental. I mean, that stuff moves me, and I do admire it. But to read a book that's 1,000 pages long, in which nobody is having children, nobody is having a stable marriage, no one is running an admirable government that's fighting for just cause anywhere. focusing on one aspect of what it is to be human and to flourish. And then everything else is just erased and thrown out as though it's just not part of reality. I'm scared. I'm scared what happens to teenagers who hormonally are in any case. No, that's the program to pull away from the parents and experiment with things. They're biologically programmed to do that. And you give them a book which says, look, you don't have to have a family. You don't have to raise children. You don't have to have a country. You don't have to fight for anything. All you have to do is assert yourself in trade. I think it's destructive because it's not realistic. It's just not real.
And I got none of it. I got none of it from it. The books were not about a family. You could write a book in Ayn Rand style about where people are a family, but the goal, the purpose, it's a novel. It's a novel which is delimited with a particular story. There's one family in Gulf Gulch. There's a little passage about raising children and the value of that, because it's not core to what she is writing about. But that doesn't exclude it. When I read it short when I was 16, and I read it over the years several times. It never occurred to me, oh, I meant same-thing family. I shouldn't have a family. That thought never came into my mind. I always wanted to have children. I continue to want to have children. I thought of it a little differently. I thought of how I would find a partner a little bit differently. I thought about what I would look for in a partner differently, but not that I wouldn't want to get
One
married.
question I have is what effect it has in society, so outside of you. So, for example, you mentioned love should be conditional. I think,
Well, it is. Whether you like it or not, it is. You might pretend that it isn't, but it's always conditional.
well, let me try to say something and see if it makes any sense. So, could there be things that are true, like love is conditional, is always conditional, that if you say it often, it has a negative effect on society? So, for example, I mean, so maybe I'm just a romantic, but good luck saying love is conditional to a romantic partner. I mean, you could. I would argue, en masse, that would deteriorate the quality of relationships. If you remind the partner of that truth that is universal, like you have to I mean, okay, maybe it's just me. I'll just speak to myself. It's like there is a certain romantic notion of unconditional love.
It's part of why you have so many destructive marriages. It's part of why.
You say that's a problem.
Yes, it's a real problem because yes, there is a. You all talked about honoring your spouse, and there's a real truth there, and I respect that. Yes, I mean, you have to do certain things. Love is not you marry somebody. There's a real attitude out there. You marry somebody. Okay, now we're just pretty close.
Just right, Hollywood. That's the Hollywood marriage.
You know, marriage is work. Like all values, it's work. It's something you have to reignite every day. You have the challenges, the real disagreements, the things you fight about, you disagree about, and it's real. If it's a value, you work it out. You struggle through it. And sometimes you struggle through it. You come to the conclusion, nah, this is not going to work, and you dissolve a marriage. I'm all for dissolving after really fighting for it, because if it's an important value and if you fell in love with this person for a reason, then that's something worth fighting for. I have a feeling that Hollywood goes the other way, but it's not this cruising along and everything's easy. No human relationship is like that. Not friendship, not love, not raising children, not being a child. They require work, and they require thinking, and they require creating the conditions to thrive, and that's the sense in which it's conditional. You have to work at it, and it's very easy not to do the work, and it's very easy to drift away. And I think most people don't do the work. Most people take it, and generally in life, they think the only place people seem to work is at work, and then they take the rest of their life as under cruise. And yet, every aspect of your life, the art you choose, the friends you choose, the lovers you choose, all require real thinking, real work to be successful at them. None of them are just there, because there is no such thing as intrinsic.
Right, I agree with all of that. I was going to say before that the rabbis have this sort of shocking expression Sally the, the pain of raising children. And I find when I speak to audiences about relationships, I find that in general, and this is cross cultural, it's with different countries, different religious backgrounds, that in general, young people do not know that the only way to make a marriage work is through a lot of pain and overcoming. They don't know that raising children involves a great deal of pain. They don't know that caring for and helping your parents approach the end of their lives causes a great deal of pain. And everything is kind of this sketchy, very, very sketchy, glimpsy kind of. And I mention Hollywood just because everything is made to look easy, except there's kind of a funny breakdown of something. But then maybe if there's a divorce, they shoot one another, so then they should get divorced. But the reality of how hard it is to do, and how heroic it is to do it and then overcome, and then actually in the end achieve something, create something that was really. It's almost not discussed. And so to me, it's just not surprising that if there's no parallel to Iran about the heroic saving of a marriage that was on Rothschild actually happened. So
it's a good point you're making, but something just came to me that I've never thought of before. So that's always good. This is where conversation is. Look, take the Talmud and the Bible. I can't remember how many years after the Bible Talmud is written. How long of a period it's written. How many people participated in writing. Ayn Rand was one individual. She wrote a series of books in philosophy, which I think are true. But in the beginning, there's a lot of work to be done. It took time. So hopefully there will be one first student who writes a book on relationship. And there'll be somebody who writes a book on developing political theory and develop her ethics. She's got like few writings on ethics, and it's in the novel, but there's a lot of work to be done, fleshing it out. What does it mean? How do you? So to say Ayn Rand didn't do everything is a truth. She didn't do everything. Okay, so what? But she laid this amazing philosophical foundation that I was roused to take those principles and to apply them to all these realms. And she does it on a scope that few philosophers have done. She goes from metaphysics all the way to aesthetics, hitting the key. And she's an original thinker on each one of those. And she might be right, she might be wrong on certain aspects of it. Always happy to have a debate about where she's wrong or where she's not. But there's a lot of work to be done, right? And if there were objectives out there, presented as, okay, human knowledge is over because Ayn Rand wrote these books. That's absurd. Right? This huge amount of work to be done in applying these particular ideas, just like there was for any philosophy. Take these ideas and now apply it to all these realms in human experience, to flesh it out and make it. And one of the reasons I don't think objectivism is taken off is because there's all this work still to be done that allows it to be relatable to people.
Let me ask a hard question here.
Can I say what I agreed with you on?
Sure. This is good. This is a transition.
This is the clip.
I mean, I agree about nations. So I don't like the term nationalism because I fear of what happens when you put an ism at the end of
Any words?
anything. Yes. But the nation is a good thing, and having a diversity of nations, in a sense, good thing. And in this sense, I think one can come up soon. I said, well, the ideal nation is a nation that protects individual rights. What are the details? How do we define property rights exactly in that word? There's going to be disagreement, rational, reasonable disagreement. They're going to be, in my future, 300 years from now, when my ideas are one finally, right, there will be multiple nations trying to apply the principle of applying individual rights, and they'll do it differently. One of the benefits of federalism is that while you have a national government, there are certain issues that you relegate to states, and they can try different things and learn, because there is a huge value in the empirical knowledge comes there. You can't just produce it all and figure it all out. You have to experiment. So I do I hate the idea of a one world government because experimentation is gone, and if you make a mistake, everybody suffers. I like the idea, and then I like the idea of people being able to choose where they live. But this notion of experimentation, I think, is crucial. But you need a principle. You need a principle. So I don't like the idea of nations if all the nations are going to be bad, right? If all the nations are going to be horrible, then I don't like it. What I like is a variety of nations all practicing basically good ideas, and then we try to figure out, okay, what works better than other things, and what is sustainable and what is not.
Given how many difficult aspects of history and society we talked about, let me ask a hard question of both of you. Please, yeah. What gives you hope about the future? So, describing the reasons to maybe not have hope. What gives you hope? When you look at the world, what gives you hope that in 200 years, 300 years, and 500 years, like the founders look into the future, that human civilization will be all right. And more than that, it will flourish.
Two things. One is history. So in the very long run, good ideas win. I think in the very long run, you could go through dark ages, but you come out in the dark ages. The, the good and the just does win in the end, even if it is bloody and difficult and hard to get there. So while I'm quite pessimistic, unfortunately, about the short run, I'm ultimately optimistic that in the long run, good ideas win. And I think the fundamental behind that I think is that I'm fundamentally positive about human nature. I think human beings can think. They're capable of reasoning. They're capable of figuring out the truth. They're capable of learning from experience. They don't always do it. It's an achievement to do it, but over time they do. And if you create the right circumstances, they will. And when things get bad enough, they look for a way out. They look at maybe at history, if the history is available to them, maybe at just learning from what's around them to find better ways of doing things, and that reinforces itself. But human beings are an amazing creature. Right? We're just amazing in our capacity to be creative, in our capacity to think, in our capacity to love, and our capacity to change our environment to fit our needs and to fit our level, and to learn and to grow and to progress. And so again, long term, I think all that wins out. Short term, in any point in history, short term, it doesn't. Right now, it doesn't work.
What about you?
Well, as usual, I'm moved by what Huron says, and I hear scripture, and the source for Huron's hope is the Book of Exodus, which is the first place in human history where we are presented with the possibility that an enslaved people that's being persecuted and murdered and living under the worst possible regime can free itself and have a shot at a life of independence and worth. And it's another inherited Jewish ideal in the tradition. The way that we express this is by saying that there's a God who judges. The Israelites in Egypt were enslaved for hundreds of years, according to the Exodus. Hundreds of years before God was judged. And here's the thing: he doesn't do anything until Moses kills the oppressor and goes out into the desert. So I think it's pretty realistic that there's a God, that God judges and acts, but probably often not for a very, very long time, and not until there's a human being who gets up and says enough. I know that today people don't want to read the Bible. They don't like reading the Bible. But I always hear in my ear this cry that Jeremiah saw his nation destroyed and his people exiled. And he says, in God's name, my word like fire, like the hammer that shatters rock. That T-shirt that said, hammer, my word is like fire, like the hammer that shatters rock. And this is the traditional way of saying something like what you're on is saying, that it may take a long, long time, but there is a truth, and it has its own strength, and it will, in the end, shatter the things that are opposing it. That's our traditional hope. We grow up like that, and so I do have hope. I see the trends. The trends are terrible right now, and it's frightening and it's hard. But we are terrible at seeing the future, and it is very possible that an unexpected turn of events is going to appear, maybe soon, maybe much later, and possibility of a redemption is there.
Let me ask, given that long arc of history, given that you do study the Bible, what is the meaning of this whole thing? What's the meaning of life?
It's beautiful. I think that the meaning of life is in part what Yaron touches on when he says that that the productive work, labor, creativity is at the heart of what it is to be human. I just think that there are some more arenas, and maybe we even agree with a lot of them, and on a lot of them. To be human is to inherit a world which is imperfect, terribly imperfect in many ways, and God created it that way. He created a world which is terribly lacking. And he created us with the ability to stand up and to say, I can change the direction of this. I can do something to change the direction of this. I can take the time and the abilities that are given to me to be a partner with God in creating the world. It's not going to stay the way it was before me. It'll be something different. Maybe a little bit, maybe a lot. But that is the heart, that is the key, that is the meaningful life, is to be a partner with God in creating the world so that it is moving that much more in the right direction rather than
a nudge, even a little bit, the direction of the world. Well, you're on. You've actually been talking in the program about life quite a bit. So let me ask the same question. I never tire you asking this question. Well, what do you think of the?
Well, I mean, I don't believe in God, so I think God doesn't play a role in my view of the meaning of life. I think the meaning of life is to live. I like to say to live with a capital L. It's to embrace it, and I agree with you in a sense. We're born into a world, and as human beings, one of the things that makes us very different than other animals is our capacity to change that. We can actually go out there and change the world around us. We can change it materially through production, we can change it spiritually through changing the ideas of people. We can change the direction into which humanity looks. We can create a little universe. I think part of the joy of creating a family is to create a little universe, right? We're creating a little world around us. Part of the joy. And there is joy in family. There's some make it all about the difficulty. Part of but part of the idea of getting married is to create a little world in which you and your spouse are creating something that didn't exist before, building something, But it's really to live. I mean, one of the things that I see that saddens me is wasted lives. There's people who just cruise through life. They get bored. They get born in a particular place. They never challenge it. They never question. They just, they live, die, and nothing really happened. Nothing really changed. They didn't produce it. They make anything of their life. They produce here again in the largest. So to me, it's in every aspect of it. As you know, because you've listened to my show, I love art. I love aesthetics. I love the experience of great art. I love relationships. I love producing. business. I like that aspect of it. And I think people are shallow in so many parts of their lives. And if you had 8 billion people, even if it never, even if it just stayed at 8 billion, but the 8 billion all lived fully. Wow! I mean, what an amazing place this would be. What an amazing experience we would have. So to me, that is the meaning is just make the most of it. Get a short period of time of it. And that's it. This is it. And live it, experience it fully, and challenge yourself, push yourself. And let me just say something about optimism. One source of hope for me in the world in which we live right now is that there are people who do that, at least in certain realms of their lives, right? And I'm inspired, and I know a lot of people don't like me, but I'm inspired, for example, by Silicon Valley. In spite of all the political disagreements I have with it and all of that, I'm inspired by people inventing new technologies and building. I'm inspired by what you talk to about artificial intelligence, new ideas, pushing the boundaries of science. Those things are exciting. It's terrific to see a world that I think surely is in decline. Yet there are these pockets in which people are still creating new ventures and new ideas and new things. That inspires me because we hope that is not dead. That in spite of the decay that's in our culture, there's still pockets where that spirit of being human is still
Yeah, they inspire me as well. Yeah, they truly live the capital L. And maybe I can start. Maybe you can also put a little bit of love with the capital L out there as well. You're on. You knew I would end it that way, wouldn't you? You're on. Thank you so much. This is a huge honor. I really enjoyed the debate yesterday. I really enjoyed the conversation today that you spent your valuable time with me. It just means a lot. Thank you so much. It's amazing. Thanks for listening to this conversation. You're on Brooke. You're on. Support this podcast. Please check out our sponsors in the description. Now, let me leave you with some words and remember. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you next time. The following is a conversation with Brian Keating, experimental physicist at UCSD, and author of Losing a Prize and The Impossible. Plus, he's a host of the amazing podcast with the same name called Into the Impossible. This is the Let's Vision podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsor in the description. And now, here's my conversation with Brian Keating. As an experimental physicist, what do you think is the most amazing or maybe the coolest measurement device you've ever worked with or humans have ever built? Maybe for now, let's exclude the background imaging of cosmic extragalactic polarization instruments.
Yeah, I'm slightly biased towards that particular instrument, but
Talk about that in a little bit.
yeah. But certainly the telescope to me is a lever that has literally moved the Earth throughout history.
It's the OG telescope.
The OG telescope, yeah, the one invented not by Galileo, as most people think, but by this guy Hans Lippershey in the Netherlands. And it was kind of interesting because in the 1600s, 1500s, 1600s, there was the beginning of movable type. And so people, for the first time in history, had a standard by which they could appraise their eyesight. So looking at a printed word now, we just take it for granted, 12-point font, whatever, and that's what the eye charts are based on, fixed height. So back then, there was no way to adjust your eyesight if you didn't have perfect vision. And there was no way to even tell if you have perfect vision or not until the type. And at that time, people realized, hey, wait, I can't read this. And get a priest or a friend over here, he can read it, she can read it. I can't read it. What's going on? And that's when these people living in Venice or the Netherlands saw that they could take this kind of glass material and hold it up and maybe put another piece of glass material and it would make it clear. And what was so interesting is that nobody thought to take that exact same device, two lenses, and go like, go like this, and look at that bright thing in the sky over there, until Galileo. So Galileo didn't invent it, but it's like kind of amazing. He improved on it by a factor of 10. So he 10x it, which is almost as good as going from 0 to 1, that's going from 1 to 10. And when he did that, he really transformed the look at it, think about it, but also as a species, using tools not to get food faster or to preserve our legacy for the future generations, but actually to increase the benefit of the.
Somebody mentioned that if humans weren't able to see the stars, maybe there's some kind of makeup of the atmosphere, which for the early made it impossible to see the stars that we all choose. It's raising the question: how important is it to look up high and wonder what's up there, as opposed to maybe this is an over romanticized notion, but like looking at the ground, it feels like we're too much focused on survival, not being eaten by a bear / lion. If you look up to the stars, you start to wonder what's my place in the universe. You think that's modern humans
I think it's a little because they also took the
right.
They took the same two lenses and they looked inward. Right? They looked at bacteria and looked at hairs and another thing at microscopes. And we're still doing that. And so, to have a telescope it serves a dual purpose. It's not only a way of looking out, it's looking in, but it's also looking back in time. In other words, you see a microscope, you don't think, oh, I'm seeing this thing as it was, 1 nanosecond ago, light travels 1 foot per nanosecond. I'm seeing it, no, you don't think of it. But when you see something that's happening, on Jupiter, the moon, Andromeda Galaxy, you're seeing things, back when Lucy was walking around the Serengeti Park. And for that, I think that took then the knowledge of relativity, time travel, and so forth. They took that before you could really say, oh, we really unlocked some cheat codes in the human brain. So I think that might be a little too much, but nevertheless, what's better than having a time machine? It's like we can look back in time, see things as they were, not as they are, and that allows us to do many things, including speculate about them. But one of the coolest things, I don't know if you're familiar with this, I'm on radio astronomy. I don't actually look through telescopes very often, except there are occasions when I take them out to show the kids. But a radio telescope is even more sort of visceral. It's much less cool when you look at it. You're like, all right, it looks cool. It's kind of a weird shaped thing. Looks like it belongs in sci-fi. It's going to blast the Death Star or whatever. But when you realize that when you point a radio telescope at a distant object, if that object fills up what's called the beam, which is basically the field of view of a radio telescope, it's called the beam. If you fill up the beam and you put a resistor, just a simple absorbing piece of material, at the focus of a radio telescope, that resistor will come to the exact same temperature as the object, which is pretty amazing. It means you're actually remotely measuring, you're taking the temperature of Jupiter or whatever in effect. And so it's allowing you to basically telescope. And there's no other science that you can really do that, right? If you're an archaeologist, let me get into my time machine and go back and see what was Lucy really like. It's not possible.
Now, the same thing happens. This is where I learned about this from marching the penguins. When the penguins huddle up together, they, the body temperature arrives in the same place. And you're doing this remotely. The march of the penguins, but remote.
Do it from Antarctica.
Okay, excellent. You mentioned time machines. I think in your book, Losing the Nobel Prize, you talk about time machines. So let me ask you the question of, take us back in time. What happened at the beginning of our universe?
So usually people preface this by saying I have a simple question. So what happened before the universe began?
Brian King, your book. I have a simple question for you. Let's just take two. I have a simple question. What happened at the beginning of our universe?
So when we think about what happened, it's more correct, it's more logical, it's more practical. Go back in time, starting from today. So if you go back 13.874 billion years from today, that's some day, right? You could translate it some day, right? So on that day, something happened earlier than the moment exactly happened. At 1 o'clock. So at some point during that day, the universe starts to become a fusion reaction. use the light elements and isotopes, with the heavier elements and isotopes with the heavier. After that period of time, going forward back closer to the day, less 10 minutes earlier, 10 minutes earlier, or later rather, coming towards us today, we know more and more about what the universe is like. In fact, all the hydrogen, a very good approximation in the water molecules in this bottle, almost all of them were produced during that first 20 minutes. The actual fusion and production of the lightest elements in the periodic table occurred in a time period shorter than the TV show that they did. Well done. Most of those light elements, besides hydrogen, aren't really used in encounter. We don't encounter helium that often. You don't need lithium, hopefully. But other than that, those are the kind of things that were produced during that time. The question became, how did the heavier things like iron, carbon, nickel, we can get to that later. And I brought some samples for us to discuss and how those came from a very different type of process, a different type of fusion reactor, and a different type of process explosion as well, called the super. However, if you go back to beyond those first 3 minutes, we really have to say almost nothing because we are not capable. In other words, going backward from the first 3 minutes since we actually marks a point where ignorance takes over. In other words, we can't speculate on what happened 3 minutes before the preponderance of hydrogen was formed. We just don't know enough about that epoch. There are many people, most practicing card-carrying cosmologists, believe the universe began in what's called the singularity. And we can certainly talk about that. However, singularity is so far removed from anything we can ever hope to prove, hope to confront, or hope to observe with evidence. And really only occurs in 2 instantiations, the Big Bang and the core black hole, neither of which is observable. And so for that reason are now flourishing alternatives that say you can actually for the first time ask the question, that day, Tuesday, the first moments of our universe, there was a Tuesday a week before that. 24 hours times 7 days before that has a perfectly well understood models of cosmology promoted by some of the more eminent cosmologists working today. When I was in grad school over 25 years ago, no one really considered anything besides that Big Bang that there was a singularity. And people would have to say, as I said, we just don't know. But they would say some future incarnation of some experimental telescope. But now there are people that are saying there is an alternative to the Big Bang. And it's not really fringe science as it once was 50, 80 years ago when these models, by the way, the first cosmology in history was not a singular universe. The first cosmology in history goes back to Akhenaten, Ra, and the temples of Egypt in the 3rd millennium BC. And in that, they talked about cyclical universes. So I always joke, that guy, Akhenaten's court, he had a pretty high Asian right now, because people have been using that cyclical model from Penrose to Paul Steinhardt and Aegis, and right up until this very moment.
Can you maybe explore the possible alternatives to the Big Bang theory?
So there are many alternatives, starting with the singularity, quantum cosmologically demanding singular origin of the universe. That stands in contrast to these other models, in which time does not have a beginning. And many of them feature cycles, at least one cycle, possibly an infinite number of cycles, called by Sir Roger Penrose, and they all have things in common, these alternatives, as does the dominant paradigm of cosmogenesis, which is inflation. Inflation is can be thought of as this spark that ignites the hot Big Bang that I said we understood. So it's a later condition, but it's still an initial condition. In physics, imagine I'll show you a grandfather clock with a pendulum swinging back and forth. You look away for a second, I can come into the room, pendulum swinging back and forth. Lex, tell me, where did it start? How many cycles is it going to make before you can't answer that question without knowing the initial conditions. In a very simple system, like a one-dimensional simple harmonic oscillator pendulum, think about understanding the whole universe without understanding the initial conditions. It's a tremendous lacuna, gap that we have as scientists that we may not be able to, in the inflationary cosmology, determine the quantitative physical properties of the universe prior to what's called the inflationary epoch.
So you're saying for the pendulum in that epoch, you can't. Just you can infer things about the pendulum before you show up to the room in our current epoch, correct?
Right. Yeah, so if you look at it right now, but if I said, well, when will it stop oscillating? So that depends on how much energy it got initially, and you can measure its dissipation, its air resistance, your infrared camera, you can see it's getting hotter maybe, and you can do some calculations. But to know the two things in physics to solve a partial differential equation are the initial conditions and the boundary conditions. Boundary conditions were here on Earth, that is gravitational field, it's not going to excurge or make excursions wildly beyond the length of the pendulum. It's not simple properties. But the next is like, in other words, you can't tell me, when did the solar system start orbiting in the way that it does now? In other words, when did the moon acquire the exact angular momentum that it has now? Yeah, that's a pretty pedestrian example. But what I'm telling you is that the inflationary epoch purports and is successful at providing a lot of explanations for how the universe evolved after inflation took place and ended. But it says nothing about how it itself took place. And that's really what you're asking. I mean, you don't really look what you care about, like Big Bang synthesis and the elements got made, and these fusion reactors, and the whole universe was a fusion reactor. But like, don't you really care about what happened at the beginning of time, at the first moment of time? And the problem is we can't really answer that in the context of the Big Bang. We can't answer that in the context of these alternatives. So you have to know about some of the alternatives. So one is aeon theory, the conformal cyclic cosmology. Another one was really popular in the 60s and 70s until the discovery of the primary component of my research field, the cosmic microwave background radiation. That kind of spelled the death, in some sense, to what's called quasi-states. And then there was another model that kind of came out of that. You hear the word quasi. So it's not steady state. Steady state has always existed. That was a cosmology design until Hubble showed evidence for the expansion of the universe. And most scientists believed in that for millennia, basically. The universe is eternal, static, unchanging. You couldn't believe that after Hubble, so they had to append onto it, concatenate this new feature that wasn't steady, it was quasi-steady. So the universe was making a certain amount of hydrogen every century in a given volume of space. And that amount of hydrogen that was produced was constant. But because it was producing more and more every century, the centuries pile up and the volume piles up, the universe could expand. And so that's how they developed slowly, very slowly. And it doesn't match observation. So that is a whole thing.
By the way, did I say I think the steady state universe is infinite or finite?
I would assume that he thought it was infinite because there was really, if something had a no beginning in time, then it'd be very unlikely we're in the center of it, or it's bounded, or it has, in that case, a finite edge to it. I wonder what he felt, but if there is this silly joke. I'm sure the silly joke was that there are only two things that are infinite: the universe and human stupidity. And I'm not sure about the universe.
Well, he's saying I'm not aware of the joke is a good example of the joke. It's very meta. Okay, so I just saw you were saying about quasi, all the alternatives of quasi-state.
And the most kind of promising, although I hate to say it, people say like quasi your favorite alternative, right?
This is not impressive.
Inflation is not transitory; it is quasi-permanent. So a very
sorry to interrupt. We're talking about cosmic inflation, so calm down.
Well, the first Nobel Prize, and one of the first Nobel Prizes in economics was for inflation, not the cosmological. So most people don't know that inflation is already won.
It's a good topic to work on if you want a Nobel Prize. It doesn't matter.
Exactly, it's time translation. So when we look at the alternative that's called the bouncing or cyclic cosmology, these have serious virtues, according to some. One of the virtues to me, just as a human, I'm speaking as a human, one of the founders of the new version of the cyclic cosmology called the bouncing cosmology is Paul Steinhardt. He's the Einstein Professor of Natural Sciences at Princeton University. You've heard of it. And he was one of the originators of what was called new inflation. In other words, he was one of the founding fathers of inflation, who now not only has no belief or support for inflation, he actively claims that inflation is baroque, pernicious, dangerous, malevolent, not to science, not just to cosmology, but to society. So here's a man who created a theory that's captivated the world of universe of cosmologists, such as it is, not a huge universe, but podcasters and cosmologists, some of both. But this man created this theory with collaborators, and now he's like, I joke, I'm like, Paul, you're denying paternity, like you're like a deadbeat dad. Now you're saying like inflation is bogus, but he doesn't just attack. See, this is what's very important about approaching things as an experiment. It's got a lot of theories on it, and that's wonderful. I think that's a huge service. An experimentalist has to say no. He or she has to be confident to say, like, I don't care if I prove you right or I prove your enemy wrong or whatever. We have to be like exterminators, and nobody likes the exterminator until they need one, right? Garbage collectors, right? But it's vital that we be completely kind of unpersuaded by the beauty and the magnificence and symmetry and the simplicity of some idea. Like inflation is a beautiful idea, but it also has consequences. And what Paul claims, I don't agree with him fully on this point, is that those consequences are dangerous because they lead to things like the movement, which is outside the purview of science. And in that sense, I can see support for what he does, but none of that detracts from my respect for a man. Imagine like, Elon comes up with this like really great idea, space, and then he's like, oh, actually, it's not but like here's this better idea. And he's like, SpaceX is not going to work, but he's now creating an alternative to it. It's extremely hard to do what Paul has done. Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean I'm going to like have more and more attention paid to it because he's my friend or because I respect the idea or I respect the man and his colleague, and it just works very hard with him. But nevertheless, this has certain attractions to it. And what it does most foremost is that it removes the quantum gravity aspect from cosmology. So it takes away 50% of the motivation for the theory of quantum gravity. You talked about quantum gravity, you talked to people and the people on the show. Always latent in those conversations is sort of the teleological expectation that there is a theory of everything. There is a theory of quantum gravity. But there's no law that says we have to have a theory of quantum gravity.
So that kind of implicit expectation has to do ultimately with the inflationary theory, so I think the cosmic inflation. So is that at the core? So, okay, maybe you can speak to what is the negative impacts on society from believing in cosmic inflation.
So one of the more kind of robust predictions of inflation, according to its other two patriarchs, considered to be the patriarchs, Alan Guth and at Stanford, along with Paul Stanford, was that the universe has to eventually get into the quantum state. It has to exist in Hilbert space, and the Hilbert space has certain features, and those features are quantum mechanical, endowed with quantum mechanical properties. And then it becomes very difficult to turn inflation off. So inflation can get started, but then it's like one of SpaceX rockets. It's hard to turn off a solid rocket booster, right? It continues thrusting. You need another mechanism to douse the flames of inflationary expansion, which means that if inflation kicks off somewhere, it will kick off potentially everywhere at all times, including now, spawning an ever-increasing set of universes. Some will die stillborn, some will continue and flourish, and this is known as the multiverse paradigm. It's a seemingly robust consequence, not only of inflationary cosmology, but more and more we're seeing it in string theory as well. So, sometimes two, branches coming to the same conclusion is taken as evidence for its reality.
So one of the negative consequences is it creates phenomena that we can't, that are outside the reach of experimental science.
Yeah.
Or is it that the multiverse somehow has a philosophical negative effect on humanity? Like it makes us, maybe it makes life seem more meaningless. Is that where he's getting at a little bit, or this is not reaching that far?
Well, no, I think those are both kind of perceptive. The answer is a little both, because in one sense it's meant kind of to explain this fine-tuning problem that we find ourselves in a universe that's particularly fecund, that has features consistent with our existence, and how could we be otherwise? This sort of weekend. On the other hand, a theory that predicts everything, literally everything, can be said to predict nothing. Like if I say, Lexi, you're working out, you look like You look like you're, about somewhere under 10,000 kilograms. Like, all right, yeah, you're right, but that's horribly imprecise. So what good is that?
Welcome.
That's meaningless. I
How are
don't
you?
contribute any what's called surprise or reduction in entropy, or reduction of ignorance. Like this is, you know exactly what you to me telling you now.
How about you?
In this case, it's basically saying that we're living in a universe because the overwhelming odds of our existence dictate that we would exist. There has to be at least one place that exists. But the problem is, it's a manifestation of infinity. So humans, and I'm sure you know this with AI and ML and everything else, that humans, as far as we know, really are the only entities capable of contemplating infinity. But we do so very imperfectly, right? So if I say to you, like, what's bigger, the number of water molecules in this thing, or the number of real numbers? Or if I say what's bigger, the number of real numbers, or the rational number? They're all different classifications in infinities. That
All right, well, I'm working on project right now, so apologies if anything.
I love you, infinity. Just come back. I love you. One, right? So, but the human brain can't really contemplate infinity. I mean, illustrate that. They say in the singularity, the universe had an infinite temperature, right? So, let me ask you a question: is there anything that you can contemplate in the observed? Einstein's little quip aside, that's infinite, like a physical property, density, pressure, temperature, and that's infinite. And I think can think of such thing. I'd like to know. But if it can, how does it go to infinity minus infinity? How does it go from like half of infinity to this? How did it cool down? How did it get more and more tenuous and rarefied? So now it's only infinity over 2 in terms of
Less
Pascal.
infinite, more infinite. Yeah, I mean, it's that's one of the biggest troubling things to me about infinity is can't truly hold it inside our mind. It's a mathematical construct. It doesn't. It feels like intuition fails. Like nevertheless, we use it nonchalantly. Use like physicists, they're incredible intuition machines, and they don't play with this infinity as if they can play with it at a level of intuition, not at a level of math. There may be something cyclical. You can imagine infinity just going around the same,
Ultimate superior.
kind of like a Mobius strip situation. But then the question then arises: how do you make it more or less infinite?
All right, you ready for me? Okay, go. You, if you want to play, we play games before we go to bed every night, and it is on the Plato app, PLATO. It's on the App Store, Google Play. Feel free to download it if you'd like. It is on my phone, so I Mr. Aquarius, how was your day? You were correct. That one. That was fast and right down the middle. Hit that. All right, I got this one dancing in the corner. Get it. It's great Very cool. Very cool. Wow. She's tough today. She's been practicing. Oh, again. One environment. Get it. Also, have you repaired a motorcycle before? How long did it take till it picked up? How often do you ride? Good. You may be ready. You wear a helmet.
was a week after I got the very last class off for the first time.
Judith. Good job. Excellent. Sweet Prince Aquarius. Take care.
Yeah, all the intuition fails.
Yeah. And I mean, how do you represent it in the computer, right? It's either some placeholder for infinity, or it's one divided by a very the smallest, possible, number that we can represent.
Well, that's basically my undergraduate study in computer science is how to represent a floating point in a computer. I think I took 17 courses on this topic. That's very useful.
I came to the right place, but But in terms of what a physicist would mean, you're right. I mean, physicists would blithely, nonchalantly subtract infinity, renormalization, do things to get finite answers, and it's miraculous. But at a certain point, you have to ask, well, what are the consequences for the real world? So one of them, you ask, what's the problem? Does it make us meaningless? They purport, many of the people that support it, like Andre Linde. In fact, Andre Linde says, you have a bias, you Lex, me Brian, you have a bias that you believe in a universe, but should you believe in a multiverse? What evidence do you have that there's not? So he turns it around. Whereas Paul Steinhardt will say, no, if anything can happen, then there's no predictive power within the theory. Because you can always say, well, this value of the inflationary field did not produce sufficient gravitational wave energy for us to detect it with concept and science observation. But that doesn't mean that inflation didn't happen. And that's logically 100% correct. But it's like kind of chewing, wonder bread. I apologize if they're under sponsors, but
That's Wonder Bread / Legs.
I could go Kleb, right? Kleb. My favorite Russian movie. Would you like a piece of Kleb?
By the way, even that word "dip," which means bread in Russian, as you said it, saying it made me hungry because it made me remember how much I loved bread when I was in the Soviet Union. When you were like hungry, that was the things you dreamed about. I don't know.
What's amazing is how many of the Soviet scientists contributed to so much of what we understand today, and they were completely in hiding. Like, there's no Google, they could look up on astrology. Nothing had to wait for journals to get approved by the Communist Party to get approved, and then and only then, if they weren't a member of some club, I shouldn't know. Like Jewish scientists, you had a passport that said Jew on your passport. And Zeldovich, the famous Yakov Borisovich Zeldovich, he was the advisor, one of my advisors, Alexander Palmer, and he had to, only because he was like at a Nobel level, and one of the founders of the Soviet Atomic Bomb Program, could he even get his Jewish student. He was Jewish too, but only by virtue of his standing, his intellectual accomplishment, did they give him a dispensation to let his student, travel to Georgia around the world. And it makes what we complain about. I complain about academia. It's like, oh, what can I talk about? We have no idea of how good it is, and that they were able to create things like inflation, completely isolated. I mean, some of these people didn't meet like people like Stephen Hawking until he was up to dead. And they just learned this thing through smuggled in. It's a work of heroism, especially in cosmology. There's so many cosmologists that were incredibly hard because they were working on it. They could pass off as well. We're doing stuff for the
At the same time, there's interesting incentives in the Soviet system that maybe we can take this tangent for a brief moment. That because there's a dictatorship, authoritarian regime throughout the history of the 20th century for the Soviet Union, science was prioritized. And because the state prioritized it, in the propaganda machines, the news, and so on, it actually was really cool to be a scientist. Like, you were highly valued in society. That's a better way to say it. And I would say, if you're saying like we have it easy now, in that sense, it was kind of beneficial to be a scientist in that society because you were seen as a hero, as the famous hero of the Soviet Union. And that, there's positives to that. I mean, I'm not saying take the negatives or the positives, but it is interesting to see a world in which science is highly prized. In the capitalist system, or maybe not capitalist, let's just say the American system, the celebrities are the athletes, the actors and actresses, maybe business leaders, musicians, and the people we elect are sort of lawyers. So it's interesting to think of a world where science was highly priced, but they had to do that science within the constraints of always having a big brother watch them. It's
the same in Germany. Germany had highly prized. I mean, one of the most famous, tragic to me cases is Fritz Haber, what that did the Haber-Bosch process that allowed us to. I don't know how you eat yet. You look Islamic. Now you fast every day, and I said Kleb, and you got filled with food.
He says I'm lifting and I look slim. This is amazing. I'm gonna clip this out and put it on.
That's right. Yeah, you got the swank left over. But when you think about like what he did, created the fertilizer process that we all enjoy and eat from every day, he was a German nationalist first and foremost, even though he was a Jew. And he personally went to witness the application of ammonia and applied during trench warfare in battles and crossing. They had a whole cadre of Nobel laureates in chemistry and physics that would go and witness these atrocities. But that was also they were almost putting science above, I don't want to say human movement, but of like the fact that he would later be suppressed, and actually some of his relatives would die in Auschwitz because of the chemical that he invented, also called Zyklon B. And so it's just unbelievable. So I feel like Matt does have resonance today in this worship of science. Listen to science, follow the science, which is more like scientism. And there is still a danger. I always say, just because you're an atheist doesn't mean you don't have religion. Just because you in my case, in my books, I talk a lot about the Nobel Prize. It's kind of like a kosher item, something that you can worship, doesn't do any harm, and we want those people that are so significant in intellectual accomplishments, because there is a core of America and the Western world in general that does worship and really look at science, predominantly because it gives us technology. But there's something really cool about that. And so for me, it's hard to find a balance point between looking to science for wisdom, which I don't think it has, but also recognizing how much good and transformative power
You open so many doors, because you also bring up Ernest Becker in that book. So there's a lot of elements of religiosity to science and to the Nobel Prize. And we still haven't finished the discussion at the beginning of the universe, which we'll return to. But now, since you opened the book, wow, unintended of losing the Nobel Prize, can you tell me the story of BICEP, the background energy, cosmic, extragalactic polarization and strength, BICEP 1, BICEP 2, and maybe you can talk about BICEP 2. But the thing that you cover in your book, give me the story.
Yeah, that book is in contrast to the second book. That's like a memoir. It's really a description of what it's like to feel what it feels like to be a scientist, and to come up with the ignorance of certain imposter syndrome, which I cover in a later book in more detail. But to really feel like you're doing something, and it's all you think is all consuming. And it's something I couldn't have done now, because I have too many other, wonderful, delightful demands of my time. But to go back to that moment when I was first captivated by the sky as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, and really mixed together throughout my scientific story, it's always been wanting to approach the greatest mystery of all, which I think is the existence or non-existence of God. So I call myself a practicing agnostic. In other words, I do things that religious people do, and I don't do things that atheist people do. And I once had this conversation, with my first podcast guest. I was just having a conversation with Rabbi. But he was actually my first guest. And listen,
Name drop,
yes. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of comments about this thing.
in case people don't know, Brian Keating is the host of the Tiffany Possible podcast, where he's talking to some of the greatest scientists in the history of science, physicists, especially in the history of science.
So when I talked to Freeman, I said, Freeman, you call yourself an agnostic too. Can you tell me something like what do you do on Sundays? He's like, no, I don't go to church. And I'm like, well, imagine there was like an intelligent alien, and he was looking down. I don't know. The thing was looking down, and it saw Freeman. And on Sundays, like a group of people go to church, but Freeman doesn't go to church. And then there's another group of people who don't go to church, and those are called atheists. But Freeman calls himself an agnostic, but he does the things that people like Richard Dawkins. He doesn't go to the same church that Richard Dawkins does, right? So I said, how would you distinguish yourself, if not practice? So I'm a behavioralist. I believe you can change your mentality, you can influence your mind, your bodily, physical actions. So when I was a 12-year-old, I got my first telescope. I was actually an altar boy in the Catholic Church. It's kind of strange for me. Jewish kid who grew up in Europe. But I was fascinated by these.
Could we get into it for a second?
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
Let's go to baby Brian. Oh, young Brian.
The new sitcom on CBS. Young Brian, born to two Jewish parents. My father was a professor at St. Stanislaus Rothschild, a mathematician, eminent mathematician. And my mother was an eminent mom and English major, etc. And they raised them, but they were secular. They we go to synagogue, 2 times a day, Christmas and Easter. We would go, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah. That's the typical 2 days. And we'd have boxes. And that was about it. And for years I was like that until my parents got divorced. My mother remarried, and she married an Irish Catholic man that I made a great kid. My father said so when she remarried the kid, right there, I was immediately adopted. When I say adopted, and he had 9 brothers and sisters, and just warm areas. They, did Christmas, Easter. It was one of the most wonderful experiences I had, and I do things with great gusto. Whatever I do, I want to take on. So to me, that meant really learning about Christianity, in this case, Catholicism. So I was baptized, and I said, I want to go all the way. I became an ultimate Catholic Church. I had like serious skills, past that collection basket. I could push people and get them to 2x their contributions. But in this case, I was 13. I don't know if you remember, we were 13. But if you extrapolate the next level up, it's like graduate student, postdoc, professor. The next level up from confirmation, altar boy is priest. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but priests are not entitled to have relations with him. And as a 13-year-old boy, future casting what I can be like for myself if I continue on my path, found it.
The math that up.
That's right. There was a series right about this instant in that future. And instead, when I should have been preparing for my bar mitzvah, as most Jewish parents would do, 12, 13-year-old boy, I actually got a telescope and became infatuated with all the things you could see with it. It wasn't bigger than that one over there that your hedgehog's looking through. Is that hedgehog?
It's a hedgehog and a fog. I should mention, and we'll go one by one. Yes, they've given me some incredible gifts. Maybe this is a good place to ask about the telescope that puts some clamps on and let the hedgehogs look. And using
Now you're a an experimental astrophysicist.
Why experimentalist versus engineer?
You assembled this telescope, you gave it a mount, and you connected it to the
There's no experiment going on. It's just engineering for show. It's very shallow. So experiment is taking it to the next level and actually achieving something. Here I just built a thing for show.
Well, that's always a joke. People say, "Oh, you're an experimental cosmologist." I'm like, "Yeah, I built a lot of universes." Actually, most of my time is putting clamps on things, soldering things. It's not actually doing the stroking of my non-existent beard, contemplating the cyclic versus the bouncing cosmology.
Yeah, and just like most of robotics, it's just using Velcro for things.
Right. Yeah. It's not like having dancing dogs and whatever. So telescope.
Yes, this telescope. What's the story of this little
So
telescope?
this telescope's a very precious thing in some ways, a symbol of what got me into, what brought me all the blessings I have in my life. Came from a telescope, and I always advise parents or even people for themselves. You right here, wherever we are, the biggest city on earth, Manhattan, where I was growing up as a 12-year-old. You can see the exact same craters on the moon, the same rings of Saturn, the same moons of Jupiter, the same phases of Venus. You can see the Andromeda Galaxy that's 2.5 million light years away from Earth. You can do that with that little thing. One that's a little more expensive. Get one that has a mount, and you could attach now your smartphone. What the hell is that? I wouldn't have known what that was before. And with that, you can do something that no other science, to my knowledge, can really replicate. Maybe biology and substance, but you can experience the physical sensation that Galileo experienced when he turned the telescope like that to Jupiter and saw these 4 dots, or that Saturn had ears, as he called it, or that the moon was not crystalline, polished, smooth, and made of this heavenly substance, the quintessence substance, right? So where else can you be viscerally connected with the first person to ever make that discovery? Try doing that with the Higgs boson. Get yourself an LHC and smash together, high luminosity, call it Harry Cliff, and say, I want to replicate. How did you feel? He didn't feel anything. None of them felt anything. It took years to come out with it. You can't do it. But this. You can feel the exact same emotions.
That's fascinating. It's almost like there's another one like that is fire.
Yes.
Like when you build a bonfire, like you actually get it. See, if you use a lighter, because I think if you actually by rubbing sticks together, however you do it without any of the modern tools, that's right.
Yeah.
And then you get to experience the magic of it, of what like early humans, when I say feel. By the way, is this the gift? This is the gift.
Yeah. You need a little bit of a swag up there.
Yeah, this is I'm pulling a food. Like, ask if this is a gift. I'm very uncomfortable feet.
Well,
Not really. This is
my childhood was about me.
but now I'm. All right.
So looking for this stuff
With
changed me because not only was I doing that, I was replicating what Galileo did, but I'm 100% not comparing myself to Galileo. Okay, if there's any confusion. But I did replicate exactly what he did. And I was like, holy crap, this is weird. Let me write it down. So it had another effect, which all good scientists, budding scientists should do, and all parents should do. Get your kid a book, a little notebook, take a pencil to it. Write down what you see, what you hypothesize, what you think it's going to be. Not like in the high school, hypothesis, thesis, but just like, wow, how did I feel? Better yet, astronomy is a visual science. Sketch what you see. The Lagoon Nebula, the Pleiadian Seven Sisters. You can see them anywhere on Earth. And when you do that, again, you're connecting two different hemispheres of your brain. And you're connecting them through your fingertips. You literally have the knowledge in your fingertips, in your connection between what you see, what you observe, and what you write down. Then you do research, right? The goal of science is not to just replicate what other people did, just do something new. And that's what we call research, and not just like studying, Wikipedia. And in so doing, you start to train a kid at age 12 or 13 for $50. It's unbelievable. And now we can do even better. Share it on Instagram, whatever, and you can, by doing so, have an entree into the world of what does it really mean to be a scientist, and do so viscerally. I often say, I was taught this by my English teacher, Mrs. Tompkins, in ninth grade, that the word educate, it doesn't mean to pour into. Let me pour in some facts into that. It's not like machine learning, you're just showing billions of cats, you're not like forcing it in, you're bringing it out. It means to pour out of the educate. And what more can a teacher want than to have something that the kid is just like gushing? You're not going to see what
inspired.
Yes.
Inspired.
Yeah.
Shout out to Mrs. Tompkins.
She's watching. Yeah. She's a big fan. I mean, she doesn't care for video.
Yeah, excellent. We take those we love for granted. This is in Manhattan.
This is in Westchester County.
Got it. So but then that's where the dream is born.
Yeah.
But then there is the pragmatic journey of a scientist. So going to university, graduate school, postdoc, and all the way to where you are today. What's that? What are some notable moments in that journey?
So I call that the academic Hunger Games. It's like you're competing against like these people, who are just getting smarter all the time. As you're getting smarter all the time, they want to get into a fewer and fewer number of slots. Like there's fewer slots to get into college than in high school. There's fewer slots in graduate school. There's very fewer slots for a postdoc, and many, maybe infinitesimal number. We just did a faculty search at UC San Diego, 400 applicants for one position. It's almost getting impossible. Like I almost can't conceive of doing what these new brilliant young people applying to become an assistant professor at a state university that they're doing. It takes so much courage to do that. I went from New York thinking I would never be a professional astronomer, because I didn't know any, I'd never seen any, I didn't even know that they existed, and I thought, who the hell's going to pay me to look at the stars? Like, will they pay me to be like an ice cream taster? Like, it's just not something I can conceive of getting paid to do, even if I had the brilliance to do it, which I didn't feel I did. And then I went to graduate school, and during graduate school, I had this kind of on again, off again relationship with my father. And I knew that he was a mathematician. He had left and got remarried himself and moved across the country. I didn't see him. And in that time, I learned a lot about him, and I learned that he had gotten very interested not in pure mathematics, which he had been a number theorist, and contributed seminal work on the fancy equations, which played a role in Turner's work. But anyway, he had become interested, turned completely away from that into the foundations of quantum mechanics and relativity, which is physics. And by that time, I was at Brown University, and I was, thinking, oh, maybe I'll be a physicist or experimentalist. I never thought I'd be a theorist. And not a theorist, so pretty prescient. And but it always appealed to me, like, why not do what made me happy as a 12-year-old? Like, we often forget about like those primitive things about us are probably the most sustainable, durable, and resilient methods for character. So with my own kids, I'm like, what are they interested in now? And it doesn't mean that's what they're going to do. I mean, someone want to play Fortnite, like professional Fortnite, which there are, but the odds of that is less than the odds of being a professor.
Can I ask you, is your father still with us?
No.
Just in the small tangent, do you miss him? Do you think about him? Does his mathematical journey reverberate through who you are?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it did in very many ways. And he's been gone for a long time now. Thinking back to that time with him, he must have instilled some capacity for me to only want to spend my time, which is a limited quantity. I don't think it's the most limited quantity, but to go into only the most challenging, interesting things with the limited time that we have. And for him, it was the foundations of quantum mechanics. For me, it was the foundations of the universe and how did they come to be. And I felt like, well, people have been trying since Einstein to outdo Einstein, and they make great progress in the foundations of quantum mechanics. But this is an exciting time. The Kobe satellite had just released and stated that the universe had this anisotropy pattern. Stephen Hawking called it like looking at the face of God and so forth. And so it seemed like this is a good golden age for what I'm going to do and what I'm most interested in. But always throughout that, I wanted to understand. I didn't want to be a wretched. No offense to people that just do experiment,
And no offense to monkeys.
But thinking back to what animates me, it's not doing the engineering as much as it is getting the data. But there's a lot of steps. I want to be the guy understanding what made the universe produce the signal that we saw. So I always joke with my theorist friends, call me a closeted theorist. Like I want to be, what they call a guy who hangs out with musicians, like drummer. So I want to be like that for physics, right? Like for theoretical physics. I want to be like the guy who doesn't do new theory, but understands the theory that the new theorists do.
I love that formulation of a theorist is understanding the source of the signal you're getting. Like the signal is primary. Like the thing you measure is primary, and theory is just the search of explaining how that signal originated. It's all about the signal. And I see the same search for the human mind, and like neuroscience in that same kind of way. It's ultimately about the signal, but you kind of hope to understand how that signal originated. That's fascinating. That's such a beautiful way to explain experimental physics, because it ultimately at the end of the day is all about
Maybe those two things that neuroscience and the cosmos might get too romantic, but maybe not in some fundamental way, some fundamental cosmic consciousness. But
we're gonna get to that.
no, we definitely have. But getting back, so my origins. So I always say, like, and I want to try. You said you wouldn't answer any questions. What's the most important day of? Don't tell me the date. But what is your most important day to you?
Do I have to answer it? Do I have to think about
No, just answer it. Like, you don't tell me the exact date by the count. It could be like your mistress's birthday or whatever. But
it? I have so many of these track. Even though I'm single, how does that even make sense? Okay. I'll say, so like a day, like a month and a day, for me it would be December 31st.
Yeah. So I was gonna say New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. Some people say birthday, anniversary, kid's birth. They're usually signifying beginnings and ends. Right? January means the portal between the portal between the beginning and the end. So you're looking back, maybe Russian, that side, the light side looking forward into January and beginning, right? So everybody's most important day is usually some beginning or something significant. For me, it was studying the most significant thing of all, when did the universe get born, as I said before. And I didn't think there was some mental obstruction that I didn't realize that I could get past, because I didn't think like anybody does it. Like I knew astronomers knew these answers that the universe at that time between 10 and 20 billion years old. Now we know it's 13.872 billion years old. It's incredible, the 5-digit, for significant.
What is it again?
13.872 billion years. 872 billion.
So is there a lot of plus or minus on that? Is it, what is
So for me, I'm 50. So it would be the equivalent of you looking at me and telling me it was a 12 hours holiday. It's a 0.5% level accuracy.
There's a confidence behind that?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's this significance. Yeah, no, it's extremely well measured. I mean, it's one of the most precise things that we have. In contrast to, 25 years ago, we didn't know if the universe was 10 billion or 20 billion years old, but there were stars in our galaxy that were believed to be, as they are, about 12 billion years old, or in the universe that were 12 billion. So that would be like you being older than your father. It was embarrassing.
Can we actually take a tangent on a tangent on a tangent on a tangent? How old is the universe? Can you dig into this number? How do we know currently with those, I guess it's like 4 or 5 significant
So we can come about it from 2 different ways. One, basically, they rely on the most important number in cosmology, which is called the Hubble constant. The Hubble constant is this weird number that it has the following units. It has the units of kilometers per second per megaparsec. So it's a speed per distance, which means you multiply it by distance and you get a speed. And what is the speed you're measuring? Well, you're measuring the speed of a distant galaxy of many megaparsecs away. So a galaxy at 1 megaparsec, well, this is actually strictly true because of local gravitational effects. But if you go out, say, 1 megaparsec away, it would say that that galaxy is moving 72 kilometers per second away. In every galaxy, except for the most local group surrounding us, maybe half a dozen galaxies, out of 500 billion galaxies to perhaps 1 trillion galaxies. So 12 out of that number are moving towards us, the rest are moving away from us. So that number, if you invert it, if you say, well, when did those things last touch each other? All those galaxies really far apart. We know how fast they're moving away. It's a very simple algebra problem to solve. When were they touching? That's where you get that number from.
So there's the local 12 and then the rest.
You know, the 12, yeah.
And 12 and then look at the others. Solve the algebra problem. How does the stuff in the beginning, the mystery of that at the beginning of that chain calculation?
Very little, because actually we understand how there's some other ingredients that go into it, namely how much dark energy there is in the universe, how much dark matter there is in the universe, how much radiation, light, neutrinos, etc. there are, and how much ordinary matter, neutrons, protons.
Okay, so
Morons.
it appears that the universe is bigger than it is older. How does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. So you're talking about the fact that we can actually see stuff in our observable universe that's located at a distance that is farther than the speed of light times the age of the universe. Yeah. Naively, you would say that. So you're right. If the universe was static, if the universe came into existence, and you can conceive of this, the universe came into a big bang in a fixed universe. So the universe just started off. Those galaxies were, they could be moving towards us, away from us. That you could say, I can see a galaxy that's at a distance of only 13.8 billion years times the speed of light. That would be true. But the fact that the light is expanding along with the expansion of the universe. So imagine there was some very distant past. We were near a galaxy. It's going to produce some light. And that galaxy is going to be moving away from us. The light's going to be getting more and more red-shifted, as it's called. And it's going to be moving farther and farther away from us as time goes on. There'll be some acceleration as we get into the era of dark energy. The light signals, there'll be some cone of acceptance, from which represents all the events that we could have received information from. We can't currently communicate with that galaxy. It sent us some light, and now it's moving away, and it sent us some light. And because the space is also dragging the photons with it, if you like, the photons are participating in the expansion of the universe. That's why they're redshifted. That we can see things out to where the universe first began expanding, not just when it began existing. And because the universe has been expanding for 13.8 billion years, with no sign of slowing down yet, which is a huge surprise, serendipitous surprise, that we can see things approximately 3 times the age of the universe away from us. So we can see things called the age of the universe 15 billion years, just to make it not simple. We see things at 45 billion light years distance in that direction. And we see things at 45 billion light years in that direction just turning our telescopes 180 degrees away. So that means we see things that themselves are 90 billion light years away. That's sort of the diameter of the universe. Is there another universe beyond that? We don't know. Some conjecture there's not only one, there's an infinite number.
How are you emotionally okay with the fact that our universe is expanding? So, like,
it's gonna be like Annie Hall, the singer.
I'll grow up in a Soviet Union. Watch propaganda.
I realized that you did. So there's a thing.
Annie Hall is that some kind of what is this?
Funny. Oh, I got this. A movie with Woody Allen, certainly canceled, but nonetheless, back when he was not canceled yet, he made a movie called Annie Hall, in which, as it's a self-depict, it's like a Larry David before Larry David was Larry David, neurotic, typical neurotic young Jew. He's in Brooklyn, and he all of a sudden tells his mother he's not doing his homework. He refuses to do his homework. His mother says, "Why?" That's because the universe is expanding, and it keeps on expanding. Everything will rip apart, and we'll never have anything in contact, and everything is meaningless. I assume these are some of the topics from the answer. And she goes, "What are you talking about? We're in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is not expanding." And that's true. Brooklyn is not expanding. The solar system is not expanding. Oftentimes they get asked, "What is the universe expanding into?" That's one of my favorite questions. What is it expanding into? And I say, it's actually an easy question to think about. You've seen your friend Elon, he goes out to space, he's got a rocket, right? What's outside of the rocket? If you take this bottle, empty out this bottle, take the cap off it, go outside the rocket, screw on the cover of it. What's in there? Is it empty?
There's just semantics, I guess. Yeah.
No, it's definitely not empty.
So you step outside the rocket,
Yeah, you're in the vacuum of space, quote unquote vacuum of space.
and there's no more liquid in it.
There's no more liquid. No, it's just a container, 1 cubic centimeter. Let's make it simple. 1 cubic centimeter of box, and you take it out into space outside the Falcon, whatever. Right? What's inside that box? It's not empty. There's actually, this is going to set your friends up. There's 420 photons from the fusion of the light elements that we call the cosmic microwave background inside that box at any second. Okay.
Now wait, hold on. What? 420. That's I've heard that before. All right, let's.
It used to be 69. But then
Wow, physics works in mysterious ways.
okay, millimeter boxes.
What are we talking about here? What's in the box?
I'm going to get that's right. Let's think outside the box. So if you every cubic centimeter of our observable universe is suffused with heat left over from the Big Bang, dark matter particles. There's a little ordinary matter in the universe, and every cubic centimeter is the probability of finding a proton, a cosmic ray, an electron, etc. There's actually an awful lot of neutrinos inside of that cubic centimeter. Now, just imagine how many cubic centimeters there are in the universe. It's enormous. That's why there's enormous numbers of particles in the universe. It's very rich. But now let's zoom in on that box. So now inside that box, there might be one. Let's say there might be one ordinary matter like a proton or an electron, a baryon, a lepton. There might be a couple hundred neutrinos, and there'll be a couple hundred photons. As I said, 420. What's between those guys? What's between the protons and the neutrinos and the photons? Like, just zoom into a cubic micron now. Like, imagine 420 things inside a box this big. It's actually pretty empty. Like, there's just a bit around. Right? So between them, there's a lot of empty space.
This is outside the kind of physics-based models of fields and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Asking the question of like, what is this
What's in
emptiness?
this particle content in the universe in every cubic centimeter of the universe?
Like outside of the 420, so you have the 420.
420.
That's some mass.
Oh, they have energy. Photons.
Energy.
That's why they don't
format.
bring suitcases. That's true, right? Photons never bring suitcases with them. Yeah. That's corny dad jokes. Okay, you'll appreciate this.
No, this got pretty good. It's just I'm laughing at the insides. What's in the box? What's the 420? What's between the photons?
That's what space is. That's what the universe is expanding into.
Okay, that's the notebook on which the photons are written. But still, I understand this, but it's still uncomfortable that if the universe is expanding, that this thing is expanding. The canvas is expanding. It's very strange. It's like if we're just sitting there still, I guess if we're in Brooklyn, nothing's expanding. So our cognition, our intuition about the world is based on this local fact that we don't get to experience this kind of expansion.
Yeah, and that intuition leads us astray. But you know that gravity is the weakest of the so-called four fundamental forces, and yet it has the longest range pervasiveness. Gravity is, we're being pulled towards the Andromeda galaxy at some enormous rate of speed because of its massive counter-gravitational force that we exert on it. So gravity is enormously a long range, but it's incredibly weak. And because of that, we can think about these effects of expansion as the relationship between as you said, the grid lines on the north. Right? Gravity is a manifestation of the interrelationship between those points, how far they are from each other, and those can change. Those point distances can change over time because of the force of gravity. So it's weak, and what we experience as gravity is the changing of those trajectories from being rectilinear to curvilinear. That's what we experience as gravity, where you have the same bowling ball and a trampoline. That's almost right, because it's actually, you have to visualize that now in 4 dimensions, like wrapping a trampoline at every point around the object, including on the sides. It becomes very hard to visualize, so a lot of people use that. It's also a fraught analogy because you're using gravity, like the notion of gravity pulling something down, to explain the motion of gravity. So it's a little overburdening.
But okay, so you mentioned Barry Barish wrote the forward to your book.
Yeah.
How do gravitational waves fit into all of this? How do they, on the emotional level, how do they make you feel that they're just moving space time?
Yeah, so gravitational waves were the Nobel Prize for gravitational waves discovery the first time. It was discovered twice, indirectly by 2 men, Paulson Taylor, and that was given my first year of graduate school. The day I entered graduate school, almost they announced these 2 guys won it, and the guy who won it did the work that would later win him the Nobel Prize when he was my age.
Is this in the 40s?
This was not this. To a cosmologist age, it means nothing. To a tennis player.
Not on Tinder.
That's right.
Sorry.
Gravitational waves do fit in because what we're trying to do now is use the properties of gravitational waves, the analogous properties that they have to photons, that they travel at the speed of light, that they go through everything, they can go through everything, and that they're directly detectable. We're using them to try to confirm if or if not inflation occurred. So did inflation, the spark that ignited the fusion of the elements in the early part of the universe and the initial expansion of the universe, did that take place? There's only one way that cosmologists believe we can ever see that, through the imprint of these primordial gravitation, not these old, newcomers that Barry studies, the ones that occurred a billion light years away from us, a billion years ago. But we're seeing things that happened 13.82 billion years ago during the inflationary epoch. However, those we cannot build a LIGO and put it at the Big Bang. So if you want to measure, let's say you have a old-time firecracker. Let's say there's a firecracker, and you want to see if it went off in the building next door. You can't see it, so you can't see the imprint of it, but you can hear it. And what we're trying to do is hear the effect of gravitational waves from the Big Bang, not by using a camera or even an interferometer like Barry used,